Here's what's happening. We have a Marine charged with manslaughter in the subway death of a gentleman, Mr. Neely, who was a long-time homeless person. He had been engaged with the law enforcement 40 different times. He'd been arrested for various things, ranging from beating an elderly woman and breaking her orbital socket in her eye. So beating her so badly that he broke 11-year-old, assaulting an elderly gentleman on the streets of New York. And this individual who had been, in and out of the legal system in New York, clearly a person who was just falling apart, becoming more and more violent, was just released and allowed by the prosecutors in New York and allowed to just continue to fall apart right in front of our faces. New York City said, no, we don't need to prosecute that person. New York City said, no, we don't need to worry about that person. We're going to let that person be back on the streets again and again and again until something happened. This person then gets on a subway car and starts assaulting, verbally threatening people on the car, threatening people throughout the car, threatening Mr. Penny, who was minding his own business. And according to a third-party witness, did nothing until the homeless person started taking off his jacket to start living out the threats of violence, where he'd said, I'm willing to die. I'm willing to take a bullet. I'm willing to take a bullet. I'm willing to die right here, because he was ready to fight, ready to assault people. Well, guess what? One Marine said, no, you're not going to assault people on this car. You're not going to do that. So he stood up. The Marine stood up and, along with others, subdued Mr. Neely. And unfortunately, Mr. Neely died. That's the unfortunate fact. But let me just be clear. I'm going to just read you what and this is from CNN, and I'm going to read to you what the defense, what Mr. Neely's, or what Mr. Penny, Daniel Penny, their names are similar, but Daniel Penny is the Marine who's been charged with second-degree manslaughter. Here's what the statement was. When Mr. Neely began aggressively threatening Daniel Penny and the other passengers, Daniel, with the help of others, acted to protect themselves until help arrived. Daniel never intended to harm Mr. Neely and could not have foreseen his untimely death. We hope that out of this awful tragedy will come to a new commitment by our elected officials to address the mental health crisis on our streets and subways. Yeah, you think? But no, what we have is a George Soros Democrat prosecutor in New York City who is more interested in social justice than actual justice, who doesn't care that it's their policies that continually turnstile out people into the streets who otherwise would be in jail, who would be hopefully receiving treatment, receiving help in that process, rather than just being cycled back out to terrorize more people, to progressively become more and more dangerous until tragedy strikes. Bottom line on this is we've seen this story playing out across America. Across America, as our big cities are being inundated by criminal conduct that is directly aided and abetted by prosecutors who refuse to prosecute criminal conduct. And yet, when somebody stands up and says, you're threatening me, you're threatening the entire subway car, I don't know what happens. I don't know if you've got a gun, or I don't know what you have on you, a machete. I don't know. What I know is you're saying you're going to take people out and you're willing to die for it. And so you make an assumption that maybe this person needs to be subdued, and they are, along with others. What Megyn Kelly was reading from the New York Post was an account. She was going to read from an account, did read from an account, that from an eyewitness, an elderly lady who said she saw it. She actually thanked Mr. Penny afterwards for keeping them safe. She went up to a witness, thanked him for keeping her safe. Okay, clearly a threat was there. This wasn't just a wanton attack. This was somebody threatening the well-being, the health and well-being of people on a subway car. And somebody stood up and said no. And now that person's being prosecuted. Yes, Mr. Neely died, and that's tragic. But Mr. Neely died as a direct result of his actions. You know, it reminds me, 38 years ago, this is full cycle, 38 years ago, it's hard to believe it was that long ago. I was a new employee at the National Rifle Association, been there a couple of years, and the Bernie Goetz case broke out. Bernie Goetz, for those who don't remember, was a kind of a bookish looking individual who was being threatened by 3 or 4 assailants on a subway car who were threatening him with and trying to shake him down, rob him, but they're threatening him with bodily harm, threatened to kill him. And Bernie Goetz had a firearm on him, and Bernie Goetz shot the assailants on the subway car. He was charged. He was charged with illegally possessing a firearm, which in today's world seems odd, but that was a charge that was real in New York City back in 38 years ago. And secondly, he was charged with assaulting these people. None of the people died. And so he was charged with assaulting them. And it was and a New York jury decided that Bernie Goetz acted with self-defense and was innocent of all charges, not guilty of all charges. That Bernie Goetz trial, and the reason I remember it is because I was, as a lobbyist, one of my co-lobbyists, Richard Feldman, who was responsible for New York, actually went up to New York and did a big press conference on the case. A lot of people at NRA were pretty afraid to touch it because the idea of possession of a gun we fought like crazy for that. But the right to bear arms was somewhat lost in the equation. And this really launched the whole right to bear arms kind of movement across the country, which resulted in Florida passing a concealed carry law, which was then the standard, and subsequently has resulted in more than half the states having constitutional carry, meaning you don't need to get a concealed carry permit to be able to actually exercise your constitutional rights. So, but Bernie Goetz case was really the transformative kind of thing that brought public attention to it and said, yeah, you can use a firearm for self-protection, and change the debate about the firearm debate from one about possession to one about the ability to actually carry and use your firearm to protect yourself. So this is 39 years later. Well, first full circle. Rather than Bernie Goetz from a subway car, we now have Daniel Penny on a subway car. As opposed to 3 or 4 teenage thugs on a subway car, we have a mentally deranged homeless person who the society truly failed because there's no compassion in what the left preaches. There's no compassion because there's no help. It's, okay, well, you haven't done anything bad enough that we're going to sit there and put you in jail. So consequently, we're going to dump you back on the streets until you do something so bad that we can't help but put you in jail, or you end up dead. And unfortunately, in this case, Mr. Neely ended up dead because he was doing something threatening people and so badly out of control that people took action, and through no intent, he ended up dying in that effort to subdue him. So guess what, folks? The New York City situation is no different than 39 years ago, in that you had streets have been turned over to the criminal elements. You have a negligent prosecutors. You have nothing. You have the police kind of wringing their hands, saying we can keep arresting them, but you just keep letting them out faster than we can arrest them. You have a city that's falling into disrepair, where the criminal element is taking control of the streets rather than the law-abiding being able to walk the streets and take the subways. And so 39 years later, we're in full circle reviewing this exact thing. And let me just tell you one thing. This is very simple. The city of New York is on trial. The people of New York are on trial in this particular case, every bit as much as the city of New York was on trial 39 years ago. The people of New York and the city of New York are on trial because here's the real deal. We have a self-defense case where there will be witness after witness talking about what happened on that subway car. And what happened on the subway car was somebody was threatening the health of everybody on the subway car. Someone was preparing to act on that, and that person was stopped. They weren't stopped with a gun. They were stopped by a Marine who engaged in a chokehold, and in order to try to subdue the person with as little amount of harm as possible. Unfortunately, Mr. Neely died in that process. The question is, will New Yorkers, will the 12 recognize the danger that subway car, the people in the subway car felt? Will they recognize that? Will they say, you know, if I were on that subway car, I would hope that Daniel Penny would have been on my car, because somebody's got to put an end to this nonsense and protect the American people, the people of New York. And if nobody was there, who knows what could have happened? That's that's the real case. Have the people in New York become so desensitized to humanity, to the failure of the system that's putting Mr. Neely back on the street time and time again, that they're willing to put a hero in jail for protecting people on that car? They're on trial. Their system is on trial. And America will be watching. This is Rick Manning, Americans for Limited Government.